And we're rolling. We're back, guys. And Brian, you just got done with a little doe hunting out with our friend Sam. How'd that go, my friend?
Yeah, long weekend. Met you in Indianapolis for the ATA show and saw some cool stuff. Caught up with some old friends, made some new ones. Ran into a couple of people that follow the show, which is always cool. And headed over to Illinois and caught up with Sam and Lou, and they were gracious enough to open their farm to me again, and met some of their friends and great fellowship and great hunt. Got some does killed for Sam, and uh, always fun to be out there with those guys.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I forgot we just did the ATA show like a couple days back. So that was a good time, a fun 36 hours for me, I think was all it was. But great seeing old friends, everybody we get to see down there again, and a couple of guys we met that follow the show. You know, guys at Northern Indiana, and then the other guy is his dad listens to the show all the time. So it was very cool to get some feedback and just be back down there. So but we have a special guest tonight. I told you guys last week in the podcast episode, I was bringing you someone from Minnesota. Sam, welcome to the show, buddy.
Hey, it's great to be here, guys.
Great to have you. Let's get this rolling. I've been watching your stuff for quite a while from afar. Let's hear about who you are, where you're from, all that good details. Paint us a picture of who Sam Tumberg is.
All right. Well, I grew up. My name's Sam Tumberg. I'll correct you. It's a Finnish name.
I apologize, my friend.
No worries. I grew up on a 270-acre dairy farm in Ottertail County, Minnesota, and hunting has always been a part of my family's life. Like, I can remember being 6 years old and sitting at the window waiting for my dad to get in from rifle hunting, and I couldn't, wait to hear what he saw, if he got anything. And that part of hunting hasn't gone away, because you can ask my dad and brother just how obnoxious I am if I kill a buck early, as far as asking them throughout the rest of the season what they're seeing, because I don't know, I love hunting through other people, and, just hearing good hunting stories and seeing what people are seeing and enjoying the hunt together. So, but yeah, hunting's always been a part of our family's life, both on my mom and my dad's side of the family. Picked up a rifle at the age of 12, was able to, get a deer my first 3 years hunting. And then it was at the age of 15 that I made the very wise life choice to quit football, because I was a absolutely terrible football player. I was 160 pounds soaking wet, unathletic, and where do they stick guys like that? Well, they stuck me on the line, and I just get chucked aside every play. So I decided that was enough of that, and picked up a bow for the first time. And I didn't really know anybody that bow hunted. My cousin Jeremy had just got into it like the year before that. So he was kind of my mentor when it came to bow hunting. Went and got a Miles Keller bow, and we went out to the round bale behind the barn and shot one time, or probably put 12 arrows in the round bale, had a group probably the size of a pie plate, and he gave me his blessing that was good enough. So I decided I was ready to go take up the hunt, and I hunted those first 3 nights at 15, and my third night out, I crawled up a big maple tree, and I was just sitting on a limb, and had a great hunt that night. Ton of deer poured out onto the alfalfa field in front of me, and I had this beautiful buck working in the range. And I had buck fever bad. I mean, I was shaking. I still can picture the maple leaves vibrating because I was shaking so hard. And this buck worked in. I thought he was 20. He was probably more like 35 to 40 yards, but I had never bow hunted, so I couldn't, judge distance very well. And I remember pulling back on that buck, and that pin was going all over the place. And it probably worked in my favor that the bow wasn't sighted in very well. I let that arrow go, and arrow stuck him right in the jugular, and he ran off the food plot. I remember running back to the farm and went to talk to my dad, who was milking cows, and told him, I think I got a nice 8-pointer. Well, he went out there later with me and my cousin Jeremy, and we tracked it and came up on it, and it turned out it was this beautiful mainframe 12, and actually like a typical 13, it had a G7. So
Wow.
yeah. So I mean, it was a younger deer, but I mean, just a beautiful, beautiful deer. I'm probably a solid 3.5-year-old, 140s type deer. And I do got to get that one officially scored yet. I haven't done that. But yeah, that's kind of what got me into bow hunting. And through my teenage years, I bow hunted hard and enjoyed it a lot. But it was at the age of 18. That's when I kind of gave my life to the Lord. And that's what really actually sparked my passion for hunting even more. Because now I not only got to hunt, but I got to spend time with God and his creation. And I mean, it just every year it seemed like I couldn't wait to get out, in the deer stand. And so through my 20s, I hunted when I could. I didn't live in around the farm. I was a few hours away, so I had to kind of be a weekend warrior. But hunted as I could, and we would run into a decent deer probably every other year. And we had, there was good deer, but they would show up at night. And when I mean good deer, I'm talking like, we'd have decent 3.5-year-olds, but they'd always be in the middle of the night. And I always had this feeling just kind of in the back of my head that it could be better. Well, we moved back to the area in 2015 when I was 30. And that's when, I'd always kind of had a passive interest in the habitat stuff, but that's when my passion for the habitat work just exploded, because I finally was here and I could do the work that I had always wanted to do. And I had a couple things that were really driving and motivating me for that. One, I knew my dad was going to be retiring in 5 or 6 years, and I wanted the farm to absolutely be peaking when he was retiring so he could have fun in his retirement. And two, I had my eldest son in 2015, and I wanted the farm to be kind of firing on all cylinders when he was old enough to hunt, which is we're 3 years away from that now. So those were the big motivators. And so I literally consumed everything I could when it came to habitat stuff. I was watching all the videos from, Jake Ealing or Randy Vanderveen, Jim Ward. There's some really good Jim Ward videos out there. Jim Brocker. I love your guys' podcast with Dr. Craig Harper. That's when I found out about him, and I've read every publication I feel like he's put out since then. MSU Deer Lab. There's so many. I was trying to find forestry stuff. I was trying to find peer-reviewed articles. I'm trying to find YouTube videos. I literally was consuming everything because I didn't want to mess this up. I wanted to do it right. And from there, it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of taken off like wildfire. I've started to, it was probably late 2015, early 2016 when I started to really start to do the work on the farm. And it's just crazy to see where we've come since 2015, where our farm has come since 2015. It truly is a night and day difference. And looking at our farm, it doesn't pop at you on paper. If you're looking at an aerial map, it's really just a series of small woodlots. We got quite a bit of tillable. There's a lot of fallow ground, some CRP ground. There we have about 20 acres of swamp, and then we do got a decent amount of water, but there's not really a lot of depth to it as far as cover. So I knew change was possible, but it's been awesome to see just how far it's come in the last 7 years or so.
Very cool. And yeah, I can relate. Brian and I both on trying to consume all the habitat content when, you go back 5 years ago, even there was not near as much as there is now. And to your point, it's just, remember all those old videos you mentioned as well. Which part of Minnesota are you in, and about what size is your farm?
So we're in Otter Tail County, Minnesota, and our farm's 270 acres. So that Otter Tail County would be, it's like west central, kind of northwest central. So we're on the northern half, but on the west central side of Minnesota. So, but we're kind of it's in that transition area between northern Minnesota, you're looking at big woods.
Okay.
The western part of Minnesota, you're looking at big ag / remnant prairie. We're kind of in that mixed age egg area. I mean, it's a really nice transition zone. So we do have a good mix of kind of different habitat types in our area. And I mean, Otter Tail County historically does have some decent deer. And I mean, growing up, we've known of nice deer in the area. It's just, we've never actually been able to have the opportunity for them on our farm.
Sure. Nope, that you answered it perfectly.
Until now, that is.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was wondering, which like what type of habitat, whether it was like the North Woods or down southern Minnesota, you butt up to Iowa the whole time. So
Yep.
it's very, and Michigan's the same exact way. I mean, southern Michigan versus northern Michigan are two different ecosystems or landscapes, if you will. So
Yeah, absolutely.
very cool. So let's get into the meat and potatoes here. So you've been studying the habitat stuff for a while now. You're back on your dad's farm back home. You said it was a cattle farm. Is that correct? Prior?
Yeah, a dairy farm. Yeah. So
farm.
we sold the dairy cows back in like 2001. So it hasn't had cattle for quite a while, but there's remnant pasture, there's CRP ground, there's still egg that we rent out.
Okay.
So yeah, but it was a working dairy farm at one point.
So being like January right now, we're all deer seasons are ended, have ended, or are ending everywhere. I know Ohio, Brian, you got a little bit of time left over there. What are you focusing on for the winter habitat on your farm? Like what are you working on these days? And let's kind of go into what you've been doing on your farm the last few years at this time.
So yeah, in the winter, I mean, as you guys know, it's all about the chainsaw. Woody browse is king up here. I've read studies, up to 80%, especially in areas like ours, up to 80% of the deer's food this time of year is woody browse. And if you walk on the landscape, you can absolutely see that. So that's my focus. Last winter, we had a really tough winter. There was probably 2 to 3 feet of snow out there, and I mean we had frigid temps, which isn't uncommon for our area, but lots of -20, -30, even -35 type temps with -70 wind chills. It was just a really rough winter. So I wanted to do everything I could to help the deer. So my main focus this time of year is just doing everything I can to promote that woody browse. I would actually strap the chainsaw in a sled last winter, put my snowshoes on, and trek to the back of the farm and cut 2 or 3 hours every 10 days or so, just to give the deer something to eat. And I did a lot of videos on it, and I showed I would cut 1 week and come back and video a week or 2 later, and you could see the deer just absolutely hammered it. But I think it made a huge difference because we had a lot of guys in the area that lost deer and found him. I know one guy that found close to 24 dead deer on his property, and on ours I walked it pretty thoroughly after snow melt, and I only found 1 dead fawn. So I think, by far the best supplemental feed we can give deer in the winter is woody browse. A lot of guys around us are feeding and things like that, but I know there's just so many studies that show how that rich alfalfa or feeding straight corn can make them sick because it messes with that rumen in their gut. So I'm just, I'm focused on getting that food to the ground in the form of woody browse. And, this is the time of year I do a lot of TSI because we did do some pretty aggressive logging. So I'm going to look for those remnant oaks that we left, those good mass producing oaks that we left, and I'm looking to release them. I love Dr. Craig Harper's study on releasing oaks, just showing that you can increase the acorn production by over 50% when you release an oak tree. So
Yep.
I'm doing a lot of that. I will do some bedding cuts this year. We don't have a whole lot of bedding work that I need to do because we have logged so aggressively on ours, and we also have some bedding cuts that I've done since the logging. Really right now it's just kind of looking for those junk insubordinate trees that aren't doing much, up in the canopy, and knocking them down so that the deer can browse on them, and we're still getting some structure on the ground and making good seclusion cages for future regen because the deer smoke everything. when it comes to our farm, because we have set it up to be a winter yarding ground, which happens a lot in the north.
Yeah, so let's go into that a little bit. First of all, while we're still in the winter food, what type of trees are you dropping specifically for the deer when it gets this frigid, this cold, this much snow? Or aren't you being too specific? You're just taking out the low grade trees.
Yeah, it's mostly the low grade stuff.
Okay.
On our farm, it's a lot of ash, box elder, lots of ironwood, and this is about the only time of year that I really see the deer hammer the ironwood, just because they are so hungry. But they'll smoke the ironwood buds this time of year. Elm, there's some aspen. We did take a lot of the aspen out with the logging, but we do have some spots that weren't cut with some immature aspen that I've done some edge feathering and things like that with. But and even with oak trees, if I go up and I have a big, beautiful straight oak tree, and I got two of them that are right next to it, and they're all bent and crooked, and you can tell they're definitely just an insubordinate tree and probably the same age as that big tree. I'll go and knock those down too, just to help out that big tree to produce more mass. So yeah, really, I'm just looking for the junk this time of year. It's junk from a timber value standpoint, but definitely beneficial from a wildlife value standpoint.
So Sam, how are you approaching getting those trees to the ground? Are you just dropping them flush cut, or are you hinge cutting some of them?
So if it's near my the bedding areas that I already have cut, and they're trees that are hingeable, I will definitely extend those bedding areas, and I'll hinge some of those trees. But on our farm in the winter, it's mostly flush cuts. I do have some spots that I need to do a little bit more edge feathering on, and when I'm doing that, I'll hinge the trees that are hingeable. If I go and work on a property this time of year, I'll gladly set up a bedding cut and use hinge cuts in those areas if the trees present me with that opportunity. But yeah, it's a mix of cuts for sure. Even in my hinge cut bedding areas, and I shared this in a video recently, I don't just hinge cut trees. I definitely diversify my cuts because I want to give the deer lots of different options when it comes to browse. They like browsing on the treetops. The treetops give me that good structure, but also flush cutting, with MSU Deer Lab, talking about mineral stumps and just the power of mineral stumps. I want to have a lot of flush cuts in my bedding areas, because you can see that those are definitely the first areas to get crushed by the deer, just because they are such highly nutrient dense forage. But yeah, it's kind of a mix of all of the above, just depending on the situation. But as far as our farm goes, I've kind of got my hinge cut or my bedding cuts and my hinge cut bedding area set up the way I like them. I might add a few trees to them here and there, but when I tend to do those bedding cuts, a lot of times I'll save it for the summer too, just because I have better luck with hinge cuts when I'm hinge cutting in the summer. A lot of times when I'm cutting in the winter, it might be 0 degrees, below zero, and they just seem to snap off a lot more. So if I do have a little bedding nook, that might wait till summer, just because I feel like I have a better chance of getting that hinge to survive.
Yeah, that's a great point. We preach that all the time, diversity, trying to mix it up a little bit. We joked early on about being pro hinge cut, and Jared got some stickers made up, and we had a lot of fun with that. I think some people still think that's all that we do, but no, we do promote exactly what you're saying, and that was a great explanation on that.
Yeah, no, I every time I post a video on hinge cutting, I always have just a little bit of anxiety in my gut, because it's amazing how worked up guys get about that. I'm like, man, we're talking about flush cutting a tree compared to cutting it two-thirds of the way through, and guys act like you insulted their mom or something when you talk about hinge cutting. I'm like, man, we're putting a native tree on the ground, and we're actually taking a tree that had no benefit standing and making it have a benefit by sitting at 45 degrees. But yeah, I don't know. It definitely can almost be political when you're talking about hinge cutting, but it has its place for sure. But I think the reason guys get so worked up about it is because so many guys do it wrong, because they don't take the time to actually study how to do it correctly. And guys see poor examples and then therefore come to the conclusion that, hinge cutting must be a terrible practice. But like anything, you have to know what you're doing if you actually want to see a benefit from it.
For sure. Yeah, so you brought up bedding. It's interesting to hear that you sound like you got your bedding pretty much figured out. Are you doing different things for summer bedding, winter bedding, kind of a mixture of both?
Yeah. So as far as winter bedding goes, we have really good thermal bedding on our property. So I think that's part of the reason that we've kind of created a deer yarding ground. And when I'm talking thermal bedding, I'm talking about those bedding options where the deer are able to get out of the winter elements. So we have spruce, we have white pine, we have a big low-lying swamp, and that's kind of the area the deer primarily hang out. But yeah, those are the main areas where we see the deer in the winter. They're not in, kind of the switchgrass pockets. They're not really in the hinge cuts. They're in the hinge cuts to browse at night for sure. And the hinge cut areas are crucial. And they come up and browse in, all the logging regen and all that stuff. But they're mostly hanging out down in the swamp because we have a very wet swamp behind us. But it does provide really good thermal protection once it freezes up. And there's tons of red osier dogwood, which is like deer candy, and so the deer are in there browsing that, and then they'll come out and browse on the plots and browse up in, all the logging regen and that kind of stuff. So those are the primary areas where the deer are hanging out in the winter. And I'm trying to add more thermal bedding. I kind of have a goal for myself to plant around, 1,000 to 2,000 conifer trees every spring, because I think we could use a lot more thermal bedding up on the high ground. I want to pull those deer up out of the swamp so we can have even better late season hunting. But yeah, that's kind of the focus for winter bedding. Spring and summer, the deer just kind of seem to be all over. I know Jeff Sturgis talks a lot about kind of those open, in the summer, the bucks like to be hanging out in those kind of open hardwoods. That's something I've kind of noticed before we did the logging. If I bumped in the woods and it was a nice airy hilltop, that's where you would often see the bucks hanging out. So we don't have nearly as much summer bedding as we used to. We definitely used to be a summer property where that's when we would get all of our good buck pictures. And then by the time the fall rolled around, they just kind of seemed to disappear,
Sure.
But in the fall, it's all about that high stem count cover. The deer are really pushing into the kind of the hinge cut bedding areas. We got some good areas of shrubby cover. We have a really sweet 1 acre wild plum thicket that's awesome, that holds deer. And we have a lot of aspen regen coming. And aspen regen is one thing that's actually been able to get out of the reach of the deer because it does come so fast after that logging. So those are the areas that we definitely see the deer hanging up in the fall. They don't tend to bed in the swamp as much until that swamp freezes over. And the swamp behind us, just to paint the picture, literally goes for miles. So, they can go as deep as they want to get away from human pressure because it goes for a long ways. So it's tough to compete on the high ground with that much cover that goes
Right.
for, that great a distance. But we've been able to slowly start to pull those deer out of the swamp as we've added that element of woody cover and woody browse up on the high ground.
Yeah, that seems to be one area that's lacking on a lot of properties that Jared and I tour with our land plan services is winter bedding. So kind of walk us through what your plan is to try to add that, kind of duplicate what you're seeing, what they're using. Kind of walk us through how you're going to plant those conifer trees and what your approach is going to be.
So the area where they use the conifers the most is set up with spruce on the outside and white pine on the inside. What I've noticed is that the deer, those spruce, they hold their branches all the way to the ground. So the deer like it when with the white pine where the canopy starts at about 6-7 feet. They like bedding underneath those, but they also like having that side cover of the spruce, to kind of give them that feeling of security. So that's kind of been the game plan, where I've been adding spruce and I planted some red pine last year just because I got them for free, but this year I have a lot of white pine coming. But the goal is kind of to have the spruce on the exterior to kind of act as a screen with the white pine in the middle for the actual bedding hubs. I do like to leave plenty of gaps so that some of that woody browse and or woody early successional growth can come. Because I mean, deer absolutely do love to have food in their bedding areas. So I want diversity when it comes to that. And we have one old field area that's just thick with box elder regen where we have scattered spruce throughout. And I've noticed as those spruce have matured that the deer have been bedding up next to those too. So that's been a nice area of kind of some thermal bedding. But the ultimate goal is to have kind of the spruce on the outside as that screen, and with the white pine on the interior for the deer to bed underneath. And I've also done it too where we have thicker spruce where I've gone in and actually cut the spruce up, 5 to 6 feet so that the deer can get underneath them. And the deer will use that too. And they'll use those areas in the fall too, not just the winter. I sat on a plot this year and I had done a cut like that. That was probably 50 yards from the stand that I was sitting, and I watched 16 deer come out of that cut onto this little clover plot that I was sitting this fall. So, I mean, they'll use it in the fall too. It doesn't, I feel like deer will use conifers all year round, but it definitely peaks in the winter for sure.
So is there anything else you're doing for food besides doing the woody browse manipulation? Are you planting any crops that you're leaving standing or turnips or anything like that to handle the influx of deer this time of year?
Yeah, we do a pretty good mix of food plots. Generally this time of year, it's the brassicas, the corn and the beans that are getting hit. The beans are normally pretty well cleaned up by December. Because we probably have 12 acres of food plots. I would guess this year we had, I don't know, 3 or 4 acres of beans. Those are pretty well cleaned up by now. The corn hangs on a little bit longer just because you get 3 times as much food from the corn than you do the beans. So that's still out there. We probably got 4 or 5 acres of corn that the deer have definitely been pawing around in. And then we got the brassicas, and brassicas, once the snow gets really deep, it seems like they struggle to get down to them. But this year we're still probably at only about 15 inches of snow, so they're still pawing down to get to those too. But those are kind of the big 3 in the winter that we have out there for the deer. There's never enough to get them to spring. I mean, they clean it up by the end of January, February, but that's kind of where February is the month. February and early March is the month I really focus on getting out there with the chainsaw, just because I know they have the plots pretty well cleaned up by then. And so I want to do everything I can to help the deer.
And are you, I guess let's explain real quick what a deer yarding area is. I don't know if we've ever mentioned that on here or not. And then did you make that a yarding area purposely? Was it already one that you've improved? I guess give us just a little bit of history.
So a deer yarding area basically is just an area. It's a destination in the winter. So when I say yarding, I say that we're pulling deer from, I share trail cam pictures with all the neighbors and people that live a ways away from our property. And I've seen pictures where I know that deer was 3 miles away during the fall, and we'll have them in the winter. And you basically create a destination because you have the combination of food and the cover that they need this time of year. So with us adding all the woody browse and with us continuing to add that thermal cover, we've just kind of created a deer vacuum in the winter. And it's fun because, we have great shed hunting. We find a ton of sheds, throughout the winter and in the spring. And my dad and brother love shed hunting. My son loves shed hunting. So that's really fun, but it's tough from the standpoint that it's virtually impossible to grow trees unless, you're caging them or tubing them, or at least hardwoods or softwoods trees, not conifers. Sure. But yeah, so it's been created through all the habitat work we've done. But yeah, it's it does make it tough to to grow trees. But we love having the deer, and we're going to do everything we can in the winter to help them out. So they find a way to find us because they know we have the food in the winter.
Yeah, that's cool. There's a lot of deer yarding areas in northern Michigan and in the Upper Peninsula. There's way more in the UP. And yeah, I've always thought it pretty neat when you're pulling deer from counties away, even or miles away, whatever it is, to the safe zone to where they can survive the big heavy winter. So it's pretty cool that you do all that for deer.
Oh yeah, and for context, I've estimated, just kind of looking at trail camera data, watching, because the deer, I'll watch them come out of the swamp, and in the pictures in the video you can see the line that they're making coming out of the swamp, and I've tried to count, but I would guesstimate that we'll have up to 200 deer, in the winter that'll yard on us. So, and that's an anecdotal guess, but we have a lot of deer, and if you walked around our farm with us in the winter, you would see that. It looks like a herd of cattle have gone through there. So they're definitely on us. They're on us heavy, but it's fun. All the work we do for the good fall habitat is going to just pull more deer in the winter, but that's okay.
Yep. No, I love it. And you mentioned something earlier, kind of moving on. You mentioned aspen cuts.
Mm-hmm.
I love aspen cuts. I hunt around them in northern Michigan. It's like the agriculture of the north, where we're at when it kind of runs out of ag.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel? How do you use them on your farm? Because you're kind of half ag, half north, if you will, big woods.
Mm-hmm.
Explain, are you using for bedding, using clear cuts, or is it food only? What are your thoughts there? And like, where do you put your focus on with aspen cuts?
So yeah, I would say aspen are probably my favorite tree to have in the north, just because they regenerate so fast. So they can actually, withstand. I watched them last year in one aspen cut, the deer browsed them back down to about 1.5 feet. But this summer, they just took off, and now they're past the deer's reach. So I love the fact that they regenerate so fast. I love the fact that the deer absolutely hammer them when it comes to a browse standpoint. But on our farm, the aspen cuts we did were just all strictly from logging. I've done some edge feathering with the aspen that, like I said, were left. But when the loggers came in, I wanted them to do the work for me, because when you do an aspen cut yourself, it is very labor intensive. Like, it is my least favorite type of cutting to do. And I've done it. I haven't done it on our farm a whole lot, but I do it a lot for other guys, and it'll kick your butt. You do 8 hours of cutting an aspen. It'll kick your butt, because once you get everything down, you have to then do the work of cutting trails through it and make it navigatable for the deer. But that aspen regen, I think, I'd put that up against any other type of bedding cover there is out there, because it's like moth to a flame when it comes to how the deer use it. They love it. Last year, I remember the buck I ended up shooting this year, I watched him get up out of an aspen cut on our farm, and he was bedded 50 yards away on just a little knoll. He didn't end up walking by me, but it was fun to see just kind of how he used that cut. And he didn't know I was there, and I got to watch him kind of browse as he made his way away from me. But I know that deer absolutely love them. But when I do the cuts, for somebody else, like I said, the big thing is you got to cut everything. You can't. I don't advise hinge cutting aspen. I think it's better just to flush cut them, get them down, and then you have to do that work of cutting lots of trails back through what you just cut, which is really tough. But the more trails you cut, the more the deer are going to use it. I was just in an aspen cut that I did a few years ago on a property a couple weekends ago, and there was a bunch of beds in it, and the deer are still in it, browsing it heavily, because there's still plenty of browse within their reach. But I think aspen cuts are a very powerful thing to have on your farm. And another thing with aspen cuts, if you have a big hardwood stand and you can find just a small island of aspen trees, I love that scenario as well, because when you do cut them, that root system leaches out, quite a ways. So it actually will spread that cut. You might have had 10 trees before, but you go in and you cut those 10 trees, all of a sudden it's going to, branch out maybe 30, 40 more yards than it was before. So that's a nice way to kind of extend a bedding area by finding those little isolated islands of aspen.
Yeah, we talked about that. Andrew, if you're listening, the land plan client from last year here in Michigan, and we talked about that with the aspen, how they'll shoot up everywhere, even where there wasn't aspen trees before. And I think it was Vince on one of our podcasts. He would go through an aspen cut with glyphosate while they're young and get your deer trails established that way with a backpack sprayer while the aspen are still young.
Oh.
So that could be something if
Yeah.
you're clear cutting. But like if you say if you're just dropping all big mature trees, yeah, you got some chainsaw work ahead of you. There's no question there.
Yeah, I do the same thing actually in all my bedding cuts, including the aspen cuts. I go into all my cuts once a year, normally early June, because I want everything to have been sprouted and growing. But I'll have the backpack sprayer on my back, and I'll spray trails, I'll spray out beds, and just kind of, I'll look if there's any dead ends or things like that. If a widowmaker or something fell and caused the dead end, I'll clean it up that way. But yeah, that is a huge thing to go in there with the backpack sprayer and just keep those trails open, so the deer can continue to navigate it, because it'll get really thick really quick. And eventually it'll get out of hand where you'll probably end up having to bring in like the forestry mulcher or something. So it's good to do that once a year and just get in, spend one good day in there, clean it up, and make it right, good for the deer to use for the rest of that summer and fall.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess you should probably do that in all your bedding areas, right? Go in there and manicure it, make sure there's nothing fell across the paths and that sort of thing. I know I did hinge cut a big aspen on my 15-acre parcel years ago with some wedges. It took a little while, but I did it. The hinge didn't survive, obviously, because they're like you said, they always break off, but it remained intact. And then obviously the shoots were ridiculous off of the stump shoots. But my northern 70 piece, that has aspen so big that they're dying and falling over. Like it hasn't been logged, and they're big around as you can reach, and it's just you're giving me the itch bad to get that property cut hard. So yeah. I understand the value of it. I do. I've seen deer use it over and over. I get it.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I tell that to guys a lot, with these mature woods that we deal with. If we don't get in there and we don't eventually reset it at some point, that's what ends up happening, is these trees end up dying from the inside out. That's what happened on our farm. When the loggers came in, there was a lot of hard maple. They were cutting the hard maple out, and most of them, they were having to chunk them up 3, 4, 5 feet before they'd hit good wood, because they were rotting at the base. And yeah, and with the aspen, it's the same way. They get real punky in the middle when they get over mature like that, and they start to lose their value real quick. So I tell people, it's kind of, you do have to be able to get in there, because this is you're going to hit a point of diminishing returns with these trees eventually. So it's okay to log and reset the forest and start that successional clock over again, so that maybe the next generation will have that the luxury of being able to log again someday.
So getting back to the hinge cutting, Sam, in your studying and reading up on those, it seems like we do a lot more of it up north, and we seem to have a lot more success from it. And from some of our listeners in the South, they seem not to care for that. Do you have any opinion on that, or maybe why there's that disconnect between us and them?
Yeah, so I just actually did a video on that not too long ago, because I get into a lot of hinge cutting debates online, and inevitably it seems like when I'm talking with somebody, they kind of fall into one of two camps. They've either have never done it before, or they live in the South, where I think just frankly there's just more options when it comes to for stand improvement. I mean, you got to think that they have twice the growing season that we have up here. So, you know, when they go in and they do flush cuts, or they do hack and squirt, or they're managing with fire, like that regen is coming so much faster than it is up here. So I think, you know, with hinge cutting down there, when they're hinge cutting, they have to stay on top of it, because, you know, that succession is coming so fast that it can kind of get out of hand quickly. Whereas on our farm, I got 6-year-old hinge cuts, and I mean, I'm not even close to the point of resetting them, just because the deer are doing that work for us. And up north, you know, like in my situation, having a deer yarding ground, if I didn't have hinge cut trees, I wouldn't have cover at all. Like I'm in the woods, because the deer reset our entire wooded acres every winter. We're 3 years in since the logging, and outside of the aspen regen, where the hardwoods regen is, I mean, it stays at about 1 foot to 2 of growth, because the deer are in there and they're resetting it every winter. So if I didn't have those hinge cut trees in those areas, you know, I wouldn't have the luxury of having cover in the woods. So I do think they play a crucial role up here, just because the deer hammer the regen so hard in the winter that it's tough to get to that point. I think eventually our logging can maybe get to that point of having viable cover. I mean, there's parts where there's like treetops that kind of acted like those natural seclusion cages. Those parts are starting to, you know, kind of get close to providing some cover. But for the most part, the deer do a really good job of resetting that regen every winter. So I'm really thankful for having those hinge cuts. And I also think, you know, in the South, when they're doing things like hack and squirt and managing with fire every 2 to 3 years, you know, their goals is to promote the good herbaceous growth and grasses. Well, up here, herbaceous growth just doesn't have a whole lot of benefit. You know, I mean, it's good fawning and brooding cover in the months of, you know, late June through July and August, but it loses its palatability pretty quickly, and it breaks down awfully fast when it comes to, it breaks down pretty fast when frost hits it. So like a practice like that just isn't great up here, you know. And I don't like hack and squirt up here just because it feels like a wasted resource to me. I'd much rather have that treetop down and on the ground providing food and, you know, that possibility of a seclusion cage to get some of that regen coming. So yeah, I think the longer growing season plays a big role in it. I do still think that hinge cuts have their place in the South. I think they're great in the South for edge feathering. I think they're good for guiding and directing deer movement. I know of guys that still use them, kind of maybe not to the same degree I would in a bedding cut up here, but they'll add them into bedding cuts and they'll see a benefit from it. I was posting or kind of commenting back and forth with Adam Keith the other day from Land and Legacy, and he says they use hinge cuts and they'll run fire through it, and it works great because then they can kind of see their designated bedding areas after the fire is done. So, I mean, they can even play well with fire. But yeah, I just think with their longer growing season and the fact they just have so many more viable options at their disposal than we do, I think that's kind of where the disconnect comes. But I do think the further you get north, the more benefit they potentially have.
Yeah, that's a great point. I never thought about it like that. They definitely have longer growing seasons, and I mean, even invasive control, they're burning a lot more than we are, so that helps to have that option to control the invasives too.
Yeah,
I think
I do. I think it'd be. I was going to say, I think it'd be tougher to be a land manager in the South, to be honest with you, just with the litany of invasives that they have to deal with compared to us. I mean, we still have invasives up here, but man, I can't. They have a laundry list of plants that have been introduced down there that shouldn't be there, and I do think it seems like it'd be a much bigger uphill battle down there dealing with all that than what we have to deal with in the north with our tough winters.
Sure. I do like how their rut is later in the year though, for the most part. Like we could be done hunting up here and then go somewhere warm and hunt the rut again. That's kind of neat.
Yeah, that's all right.
That's kind of neat. Yeah, my buddy Riley in Mississippi, he has I did a land plan for him down there last year, flew down there, and he has his rut's not till like December or like late
Oh
December,
wow.
I think it was. And I'm like, man, that's amazing. You know, I get to hunt around Christmas time and all that with some really good deer. But anywho,
Oh yeah.
I like your point on hinge cutting. Like Brian said, it gets talked about a lot, thrown around a lot. Sam, you called it a buzzword before for sure. It's a tool. I've said this 100 times. It's a tool in your tool belt. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's if you
And
if you want to screen off a cabin or a parking lot or a road or whatever from your property, it makes pretty immediate fencing, like immediately.
mhm.
But there's also a lot more ways to skin larger pieces of ground too. But the immediate side cover is a benefit that I can't always get around. That's a great advantage.
Yeah. And I mean, I think hinge cuttings, it's here to stay. Like you hear a lot of guys say it's just a fad, but I mean, it's already made its way into even academia. Like Dr. Craig Harper will use hinge cuts, and he talks about it as one of the FSI practices. So I mean, I think it's here to stay, and I'll have guys tell me, just quit talking about it. You can use it, but just don't talk about it. But I'm like, so many guys use it incorrectly. Like, why can't we talk about it? Like why can't we show people how to do it right?
Man.
Because that is a big dig on hinge cutting, is that it is often done wrong. So why can't we try to educate people how to do it correctly and to let them, if you follow my channel, you'll know that I don't just use hinge cuts. I mean, I talk more about any of the other timber management practices up here than I do hinge cuts, but I do intentionally talk about hinge cuts just because I've seen it done incorrectly so many times, and I've done it incorrectly myself. Even after trying to educate myself, I still made mistakes. So I want to help guys get ahead of the learning curve, and so they don't have to struggle through their first few cuts with it before they find it kind of clicks with them. So
Yeah,
so
and
that's
to
kind
your
of my
point,
goal with hinge cuts.
I mean, even to your point, if somebody screws up, like Mother Nature rebounds pretty quickly.
Oh yeah.
Don't go testing your hinge cutting skills on an entire 40 acres, right? Like get yourself honed in on some quarter-acre bedding areas, and if you screw it up, you can go in there with a chainsaw and fix it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've done exactly that. I mean, I think one of my
Right.
first cuts I did, I went in and it was like 2 hours, and I was okay. Now it looked like a flush cut area. Like it wasn't a big deal at all to go in and reset it. But even if you screw it up and all those trees die, well, whatever, they were junk trees anyway, right?
Yep.
So you're not out anything. If you did a decent job where you still got some sunlight in, you're still going to get the regen. Those treetops are going to act like those natural seclusion cages and help maybe some hardwoods regen out. Yeah. So I mean, it's a learning curve, right? And we'll all get there eventually. And I mean, that's just my goal. If I want to try help guys get there a little bit quicker.
Couldn't agree more. Let's keep moving here. I want to talk about another I would say highly debated topic would be switchgrass. Okay.
Mhm.
I hear a lot of people want to plant a lot of switchgrass, some want to plant varieties, some want to plant patches. I like the idea that we talk about switchgrass in the north. Let's stay on
Mhm.
this central Minnesota, northern Midwest camp that we're on here. Let's talk about how you use switchgrass, what type of switchgrass you use, and how it works for you.
So my primary reason for using switchgrass is for screening. I love it as a screen. I don't like it as a standalone screen. I'm pretty much always combining it with edge feathering, but I like it as a screen. I did find out fairly quickly a thick monoculture stand of switchgrass will not result in a whole lot of deer bedding. You'll find a few beds here and there, but planting 10 acres of dense switchgrass, I don't think is the way to go when it comes to bedding. Switchgrass is actually probably my least favorite form of bedding structure, but I still want to have it on our farm because I want a diversity of bedding
Diverse farm.
options.
Right.
Yeah. So when I plant it, I plant patches and strips of thick switchgrass, and inevitably the deer always bed up against it. And the more room I leave for some of that early successional growth, I'll be adding in. I saved a bunch of acorns and things like that. I'll be doing some tree seeding this spring. I'll be adding in some conifers. I've added in plum in some of these areas. But ultimately, the deer seem to want to bed up against it rather than in it. So it's when I'm setting up, I have one area on our farm that I'm setting up this way, actually two different areas on our farm that I'm setting up this way. What I'm doing is looking for like small patches, quarter acre, half acre strips, things like that. And I'm planting it knowing the deer will likely bed up against it, because it does provide that immediate structure. What I've seen is that the more open the area that you're in, the more benefit you have with switchgrass. So if like I was out in western Minnesota on a property, there it would have a lot more application than where I'm at, where they do have so many other bedding options. If I was in northern Minnesota, I would never, ever recommend it as a bedding option, because I think the bedding you can set up in the timber far exceeds the bedding that switchgrass can provide. So I would never tell a guy, hey, let's clear 3 acres of timber and plant switchgrass. I don't think that's a good option at all. I would still use it up in those situations.
Plus you're fighting mother nature so much more at that time, right? Like,
yeah. Oh
you're
yeah,
really,
absolutely.
yeah. Anyway, sorry, just to keep going.
Yeah, no. So I prefer the regeneration that Mother Nature can provide, and like you said, it's an uphill battle because there's going to be you clear cut an area, you're gonna have everything coming back. So, and I see those questions a lot. Can you plant switchgrass in the timber? And I just try to steer guys towards, hey, just focus on getting that woody regen coming. Focus on setting up that woody bedding structure. And let's use switchgrass as screening, or if you are in mixed egg or getting closer into big egg and prairie country, then you start using it in bigger applications, because it when you're out in an area where there's no cover and you plant a bunch of switchgrass, of course you're going to get deer bedding in it, and it does provide very quick bedding. So I use it, but I use it just to give the deer another option, and they are using it, like they do bed in it, so it does provide bedding structure on our farm. I need to do quite a bit more work as far as building up just those adjacent areas that I have set up next to the switchgrass to get some diversity of plants coming in those areas. But they will use the switchgrass. The types of switchgrass I've planted, I've done cave and rock. I've planted some real world. I've planted Shawnee, and then I got some RC Tecumseh that I just planted this last summer. The Shawnee, the cave and rock, the real world are all over 3 years old. So I feel like I've been able to see what they can each do fully. Of those three, my preference has been the Shawnee, which is just an improved version of the cave and rock. I think it was, I'm probably going to misquote this, but I feel like it was the mid-90s when it was developed. I know it was the University of Nebraska that developed it. But what I've seen is that it's definitely held up better than the cave and rock, and I only have one area of real world. And so I haven't quite been able to compare it, I feel like, to the real world, but it definitely beat out the cave and rock as far as standability. But I'm really, really excited about the RC Tecumseh, because do you guys know who Roger Sampson is?
Yeah, we're connected on Facebook.
Okay. Oh, you guys are connected. Okay. So I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years and picked his brain on switchgrass, and it's just been fun to see his research and where he's been able to go with the RC products as far as switchgrass goes. So, I'm only a year in, so I can't speak from experience yet. But I do feel like, just based on what I've seen with his research and what he's been showing and through video and everything else, I think that those are going to kind of be the switchgrasses of the future when it comes to deer habitat, because, it's the first time switchgrass has been improved since, I think, Shawnee in the mid-90s. So it was time that somebody stepped up to the plate and did something with switchgrass. And nobody knows more than switchgrass, I think, than that guy. So excited about those, and I'll be sure to kind of document and show how the Tecumseh is doing. He's also got RC Big Rock that does better in a little bit wetter areas. But the Tecumseh handles the lower rainfall areas really well, so that's why we planted Tecumseh on our farm. But so far, the first year stand looked great, and we'll see what it does in the future.
Have you ever planted Canlo? The Canlo variety?
What was it? I couldn't hear that. What was that?
Kanlow. Have you ever planted that variety or heard of that?
I feel like I have heard of it, but no, I haven't planted it.
Okay, it's another one that I thought was better in lowland type settings, but is not talked about near as much. And then I know that, yeah, like you mentioned, the RC stuff has been the buzz on Facebook for the last year or so. So that is pretty neat. I'll have to talk to Roger about that sometime soon. That'd be a good conversation too.
And I shouldn't say that the RC Big Rock is good in lowland. It's just good with more rainfall. So if you're in an area like southeastern Minnesota gets a lot more rainfall than us, then you can do the RC Big Rock because it likes to have a little bit more rainfall than the RC Tecumseh, and it does get a little bit taller than the Tecumseh. So there is an incentive to wanting to plant the RC Big Rock if you have the rainfall for it. But there's still upland varieties of switchgrass, as far as I know.
Yeah, there's upland and lowland, I believe. How is the snow load? How out of your varieties, what handles the snow the best? Are you still going with the Shawnee?
Yeah, the Shawnee, I mean, so I'm trying to think how old my Shawnee stand is. It's 4 or 5 years old, and the Shawnee's definitely been the last one to go down. I tell guys, you can't bank on switchgrass in Minnesota for 12 months. Like, it's just not going to happen. We've had one winter where it stood for most of the winter just because we didn't get a normal amount of snow. But most winters, it'll get me through all the way through, or most years, it'll get me all the way through the deer season. And generally, towards the end of December, beginning of January is when it'll tip over. And normally it's down until like mid-March. But once the snow starts melting, you'll start seeing it springing back up. But the Shawnee's the one that definitely seems to handle the snow the best of the three. Yeah, it normally is the first to pop back up. I've noticed with the Cave-in rock, it kind of breaks off a lot, so it doesn't spring back up the same way the Shawnee does. So yeah, if I had to pick right now between those three, based on what I've seen, given they're all mature stands, I would definitely go with the Shawnee.
Okay, and out of all your, I almost switchgrass question real quick. Out of all your stands, you're saying you're not planning, a big monoculture of it. Are you planning it in ways where you can still burn it? So are you planning, fire breaks, clover around it, or I'm just interested in the concept of planting it among, more thermal bedding with some Norways in there, with some other woody species in there that like to grow up if not burned. I guess explain me real quick on your thoughts on how you lay it out.
So initially, yeah, I had a fire break around my switchgrass, well, at least the one switchgrass area, but that was just to make sure that I could get it established good. But now as I go forward, I'm going to let it turn into a dirtier stand of switchgrass. Because I do ultimately want the woody succession and those things to kind of take over in those areas. So yeah, I have a fire break set up around the one stand. The other stand I don't, because I've been planting trees in that area for 7 years. So I'm not going to be running fire through that. But the one part I do, and it was just to try get it established, because I planted the 1 year that I planted, I didn't get a very good take because I was experimenting with some different planting methods. So I wanted the luxury of being able to use fire to kind of release that switchgrass the next year. And what I ended up doing is I came in and it looked terrible. It looked like I had a failed stand. Well, what I did is I had my fire break established with the clover, and I came in and I sprayed it. And I sprayed it right, like it was early May, right when the cool season grasses were popping. Got those killed and then burnt it. It was probably the second to last week of May. And that just lit that switchgrass on fire. So all that that switchgrass that was kind of weak and stunted just took off, and I actually ended up having a really phenomenal stand. So that's why I tell guys, don't give up on a poor switchgrass stand. You can
Right.
be 2-3 years in and still have a chance to recover it. Especially the first year. I mean, a lot of guys' first year stands don't look good, but they can definitely still blow up the second year. But using the spray to just knock out all that competition, I just did the 2 quarts per acre with glyphosate, in early May before the switchgrass germinated. That's crucial because obviously you'll kill the switchgrass if you're spraying gly on it
Right.
after it's germinated. But I knew it hadn't germinated yet, so sprayed it and hit it with fire, and that stuff just absolutely blew up. But now it looks like a big, beautiful stand. So I'm cool with it going dirty and then starting to add a bunch of other stuff into those areas.
I love it.
So Sam, I want to get into edge feathering a little bit. Can you walk us through where you're using it and how you're setting up your edge feathering?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of do 2 different types of kind of edge cuts. So I do the normal edge feathering where I'm cutting it perpendicular to the edge of the woods. So and a lot of times where I'm edge feathering, there's a food plot right there that's along the edge of the woods. So I'll cut it perpendicular, and then sometimes I'll cut it parallel with that plot. When I cut it parallel, I'm doing it more to act as a true screen and to kind of guide and direct that deer movement. So if I really want to pinch down deer in front of a bow stand, I'll do more parallel cuts because it's easier to create a true wall where the deer can't get through it. And you can really pinch the deer down nicely in front of a bow stand if you're trying to set up like a 20-yard shot. And then I do the perpendicular cuts in areas where I'm wanting to bed those deer right up on that edge. So obviously these aren't areas that I'll be walking by because I don't want to be bumping deer, but I will, I'll lay those trees out into the plot, or if it's a fallow area or whatever, with the intention of having those deer bed up right behind them. So what I do is I do my hinge cutting, or, if it's trees that don't hinge, I'll flush cut them, lay them out into the plot. And then behind my perpendicular cuts, I set up a trail for the deer to travel so they can navigate right behind that cut if they want to. And I'll get does and fawns to bed right up onto that cut. And my theory with that is, we're dealing with a bunch of small woodlots. So I want to pull those does as close to the food as possible so that the center of the woods, when you're dealing with a bunch of 10-acre pieces of woods, that's not a whole lot of depth. But if I can get them right up on the food sources, I can leave the center of the woods with the intention of hoping that, the bucks will start to find kind of their own security areas and bed up in some of those other cuts that I set up in the middle of the woods.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, kind of like layering the bedding. I think Jeff Sturgis talks about that big time.
Yep.
So are you using it for anything else besides food plots? Or are you putting it around your switchgrass or any of your cuttings that you're dropping trees for woody browse?
So I'll use it as screening around food plots. I've used it actually as kind of screening for the neighbors. We have a neighbor up next to us that doesn't hunt, and they enjoy their property. They recreate on it. So I did a pretty heavy cut right down the property line. He actually helped me with it. So, and I told him my intentions. I said, I just want the deer to feel as secure as possible on our farm. So I'm going to cut the property line really hard, just to kind of create a screen so that there's a little bit more of a security factor on ours. And he was cool with it, and he was out there helping me cut trees when I did it. So I did it with that intention. I did a video when I made that cut that you could also do that as a way of maybe deterring, trespassing. If you cut a property line hard, if you were dealing with trespassing issues, which fortunately we don't deal with. We have phenomenal neighbors. So that's never been an issue, but it could have that application. I'll cut in areas. There's some areas where these woodlots go right up next to some fallow areas, and I'll edge feather in those areas, and just to kind of extend my woods a little bit. I love it when I got aspen on those edges because I know when I cut them, those aspen are going to leach out into those fallow areas, 20, 30 yards. So they're going to give me, that much more woods to work with eventually. So I'll cut in those areas too. I use it as a way. There's some spots. We got a ridge that runs through the middle of our property, and there's a spot in the ridge where I want to be able to kind of have a good screen to get down to a stand, and I did a parallel cut right there, just to make a nice little screen so I could get down to the stand on the ridge. So yeah, I guess those are the primary ways that I'm using edge feathering. I've done I just went and worked a property a couple weeks ago where I did a big aspen cut along the edge, and it was on a swamp transition. And the reason I did it there is because deer love bedding, up against swamps. So I did a big edge feather along that with the intention of getting that regen to blow up right on that swamp edge and get deer to bed all the way up and down that edge. So I feel like there's a lot of different applications for it. It just kind of depends what kind of woods you're dealing with, what your situation is.
Yeah. Yeah. Like anything. And like you mentioned, when we were talking prior to the recording, yeah, it's a great habitat, practice, if you will. Edge feathering, softening that transition from the hardwoods to the open field or whatever that may be. Creating that staging area, early successional growth, like Craig talks about. You can't go wrong with it, really. And the aspen concept that you just said, even I didn't think about that, where you get the roots out there as well. That's another pro in the edge feathering column.
Absolutely. And I love edge feathering because the trees are always leaning out. So it's a really easy type of cutting to do. I mean, you can knock 200 yards down fairly quickly when you're cutting that way, because everything you're just tipping out. So yeah, it's definitely something. It's something that any guy can do, and it's tough to mess it up. You're just dropping trees.
Exactly. Well, we've already had you here over an hour, and I do have a couple things left. So I didn't put this on the note, but I meant to. I want to hear about this little buck that you shot this year up in Minnesota.
All right.
I guess frame it up for us quick, and then dive into it, and I want to hear about it.
All right. So this was a buck we called Chevy. The story of Chevy starts in 2020. So he was a 3-year-old in 2020, and he was the one 3-year-old on camera. I said, because I mean, you got to understand, like, before all this habitat stuff started, like, we'd get excited when we'd see a nice 2-year-old, because we just didn't see bucks in daylight on the farm. So a 3-year-old's always been a shooter in my mind. Well, I took out a couple of them. I think 2018 I shot one with the bow. 2019 I shot one with the bow. So 2020 rolls around, and I'm like, I am not shooting a 3-year-old. We got this farm to the point where it's starting to get dialed in. There were older deer on camera, so I said, I'm not shooting a 3-year-old this year. Well, Chevy was a 3-year-old that year, and he was a beautiful 3-year-old. And it was November 1st, which is my favorite day to be out on stand, and I was sitting on the downwind side of a kind of a hinge cut bedding area that I did, and I had a travel corridor cut working that downwind side right below the hinge cut, and here came Chevy, just on a string right down the travel corridor. He worked into about 30 yards, and I looked at him like he's probably a 135 to 140 inch deer, as a 3-year-old, and I just couldn't help myself. I'm like, I'm shooting this deer. So I stopped him at 30, and he had a branch probably a 1-inch diameter branch over his vitals. And I saw it, and I was like, you know what? I'm either going to hit the branch or I'm going to kill this deer. And I'm like, what are the odds I hit this 1-inch branch? Well, I pulled back, shot, and I smoked the branch. And he took off and stopped at about 40 yards behind brush, and I got to watch him for like 10 minutes, and he ended up walking off. So thank God that I missed that deer, and even though I broke my own rule that I was only going to shoot a 4-year-old. So 2021 rolls around, and on opening morning of bow hunting, we will hunt early season in the morning. fringe stands if we have a dynamite axis. Not often, but we will do it periodically. And opening morning, we normally always go sit on stands where we're just way off anything. We won't mess anything up. And I had a stand where I had great access, and I was sitting, and it was about a half hour after daylight, and here comes Chevy. He was working in. He stopped at 60 yards. There was 2 bucks that started fighting, and he kind of got distracted by them, but he was on a trail that was going to come right to my stand. Well, these bucks held up for like 25 minutes, and they were fighting and ended up taking him off, and I got to watch him walk away. And as a 4-year-old, he blew up. He was probably a 155 to 160 type deer. So, he definitely had our attention. And we actually had one other stud deer on the farm last year or two that was a 6.5-year-old that my dad got the sheds of that was probably pushing 165 to 170. I think he actually ended up dying over winter. He got sick or something. So we had 2 studs on the farm. So I was going to sell out for those 2 deer. Well, a couple hunts later, I saw Chevy get up out of the aspen slash like I had talked about earlier, and he walked away from me. And then I go on a hunt. It was October 5th, and I was with my son, and we're sitting over a food plot, and it was a hot night. I wasn't thinking we were going to see anything. Well, this buck steps out. He's an 8-pointer with double eye guards, and it's just a perfect 3-year-old deer. The type of deer I said I absolutely was content not shooting. So he walks in, and my son's with me, and he stops at 30 yards, and I'm looking at Noah, and he's just looking at me, and he's like, "Shoot, Dad, shoot, shoot, shoot." And I'm like, "Buddy, I can't shoot that deer." He's like, "Shoot, shoot." So I don't shoot him, and I look down, and he is just heartbroken. Well, this deer comes in at 20 yards, and I look at him again, and he's shoot, shoot. And I just said, "Screw it. I'm shooting this deer. This is going to mean way more to us if I kill this deer than if I, kill one of those 2 studs by myself." So I pull back, I shoot him. He runs 20 yards, drops in the plot, and it was the best hunt to date that I've been on because
Awesome.
Noah was through the roof. We were high-fiving. We were so excited. So that was 2020.
You only get 1 buck tag?
We only get 1 buck tag in Minnesota. Yeah, you can party hunt in Minnesota.
I didn't know that.
But Minnesota is a 1 buck state. So you
Okay.
As a rule of thumb, if I shoot when I'm done after that, even though you can party hunt. So,
Gotcha.
So that was it. That was 2021. Shot that deer, and it was awesome, but didn't get a crack at Chevy. So finally, this year rolls around, and it's the day before bow season, and we get Chevy in daylight on a food plot the day before. And I've been watching him all summer, and he blew up this year. He became a stud. And it's always been a goal of mine to shoot a gross spoon deer, and he was definitely a gross spoon deer this year. So he shows up in daylight the day before bow season opens up, and we were talking about it the night before, and I told my brother, like we were talking about where to go sit, and I said, "You can go sit there," because we had 3 different bucks that were daylight that were all nice deer on this one food plot. So he goes and sits in that plot that Chevy was in the night before on opening night, and he had one of the other bucks come out, and I don't know what happened, but he shot at that buck and he stoned it. I think he might have hit it either in the shoulder or the brisket, but the thing ran off. We ended up tracking it, put a dog on it, and couldn't find it. He actually ended up showing up on camera again a week later, so he was perfectly fine, superficial wound, but that kind of boogered up that area that Chevy was in, after he had that encounter with that buck. So that early season, I was just hemming and hawing, like, where's this deer bedding? Because I had a kind of a theory of about 4 or 5 different areas where I thought he could maybe be. Well, it was October 7th, and I had this stand that I hung on a whim this summer in an area I've never hunted. It was a spot I just was out just for a walk, and I saw this spot, and I've stared at all this ground for 25 years, so you'd think I'd have every spot figured out, but it just kind of popped when I saw it, and I was like, man, I got to put a camera here. This looks like a really nice pinch. And as I put the camera up, I'm like, man, I should probably have a stand here. So I ran back to the garage, I grabbed a portable, and the only thing we had in there was a portable without a seat. So I grabbed like 8 screw-in steps and a portable, threw the stand up quick, set it, cut like 2 branches and left and kind of forgot about it. Well, fast forward to the fall and where we're kind of getting pictures of Chevy on the camera and stuff, I realized like, okay, there's a decent chance that he's in this area. And I was talking with my cousins and my friends about it. My one cousin felt strongly like he might have been there too. And so I'm like, okay, first good cold front, I'm going in there. So it was October 7th. We had a killer cold front come in, probably a 30-degree temperature drop. And I said, okay, this is the night I'm going there. And I told everybody at work that day, I was like, I'm either going to end up killing this deer or I'm going to get skunked, because that's the kind of spot it was. You know, it felt like I was going for a home run. Like he'd be the only type of deer that would be down in this area. So I go to the stand, and the stand is set up between a green food source. There's a tiny little marsh with like, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 willow bushes in it. And then there's oaks directly behind me. So I had no clue where he's bedding. It was about 5:30. I had this 8-pointer walk out. Beautiful 8. He was at 30 yards, like 10-inch G2s. And I was like, oh man, like this is the kind of buck I would normally get really jacked about and want to kill. And I watched him. He cut the shooting lane. Fortunately, didn't even give me a whole lot of time to, him and haw over him. And he ended up walking off. And I was kind of thinking, man, was that going to be my best chance this year at a good buck? And watched him walk away. Well, about 7 o'clock, I was sitting there and I was kind of looking just kind of off to the west. And those 6 willow bushes, like Chevy steps out of them. And he had to have been bedded within 35, 40 yards of me, because I could see to the left and the right of these willow bushes. So I would have known if he, came from, and I would have heard him walking through those cattails. But he steps out of those willows and he's like 21 yards away. So, immediately buck fever kicks in, because I've never had a deer like this, that close. And so I start shaking, and I'm just sitting there praying. I'm like, God, can you just help calm my nerves? And fortunately, kind of hung up in the aspen for a little bit. And I was shaking. It was just like going back to when I was 15 and I had that buck in front of me. I could see the leaves on the little aspen tree I was in just quivering. And fortunately, I was able to calm my nerves down. And I kept looking at windows. I'm like, oh, I could take a shot there. I could take a shot there. I'm like, no, just be patient. Wait till he steps out in the shooting lane. Well, after about 3 minutes, he steps out in the shooting lane. He's 19 yards away. And fortunately, right before he steps in the shooting lane, there's a big aspen tree he was standing behind, so I could pull back then. Got out in the shooting lane. I put the pin behind his shoulder and let it go, and I watched that Luminok berry right where I was aiming. He busted off to the west, and after that, I just lost it. And I always kind of daydreamed about what I would do, if I actually got a chance at that deer. So I'm like, I should put the camera on myself just to see what I'm like after killing a deer like that. And I was just ridiculous. My wife watched the video. She's like, let's see here. So we get married, you don't cry. Our kids are born, you barely cry. And then you go and shoot a stinking deer and you can't like keep it together. I was like, I don't know, I can't. I just told her, I'm like, this pure adrenaline, because
He has a point.
I lost it. It was something else. So
Well
yeah,
done.
the arrow went where it needed. Yeah, it went where it needed to go, and I went and got my dad and my brother and my wife and my boy and my buddy that was up hunting with me that weekend. And we went on the track, and the rest is history. So, by far the biggest deer I've ever killed. I did wait the 60 days to get him taped out, and he ended up going gross score. He went 180 and 0 ace. So, yeah, he was even bigger than I kind of thought he was. Yeah. So I don't think he's one that I'll ever top, but hey, you never know. Lord willing, I got a lot more years of hunting in front of me, so we'll see what the farm can produce in the future.
Heck of a deer, man. Well done. And, obviously pays off to put all this habitat work in like you and your family has. And, man, congratulations. That's a giant deer. You guys in Minnesota, you guys have some bigger deer in Minnesota than what you all let up. I'll tell you that right now. My buddy Brandon, he kills some nice deer out there too. Yeah, you guys.
Well, there's hidden gems out here for sure. So we don't want to, have too much publicity when it comes to that. But yeah, there's some pockets out here. I'll give you that.
No kidding. Well done. What'd that deer weigh? Did you weigh him?
I should have. I didn't. I let him hang for a couple days, and then we took some good pictures and stuff. But we don't have a scale at the farm. And he actually, after I got him dressed out and stuff, I don't know if he would have went over 200 pounds. I thought he was on the hoof. He looked like a 200-pound deer, but I mean, I would guess I would have been surprised if he went over 200 pounds. So, but still, I mean, just he had a lot of rack he had to carry around, so probably gave him a good workout.
Yeah, no, that was a beautiful deer. That's awesome. Sam, I have kind of a new ending to the podcast I'm going to try tonight. So you're the first test subject. I hope you don't mind.
No, sounds good.
So I have 7 questions. The 7th question is our all known favorite tree question. Feel free to take your time on that one, but the first 6 you gotta answer quick. This is rapid fire.
All right, let's go.
Are you ready? All right. Favorite beverage?
Water.
Favorite venison recipe?
Okay, so taking the loin, cutting it in a 6-inch piece, searing it, and then baking it at 225 for about an hour with a good rub on it.
Lovely. Fixed blade or mechanical broadheads?
Fixed blade all day.
What do you hunt the most out of? Preset stands, blinds, or like mobile hunting, saddles, climbers, etc.?
With the farm, it's all preset. Yeah.
Food, water, or cover the most important thing to you?
Oh, man.
You have to pick one.
Okay. Cover.
Yep. Favorite habitat implement?
Chainsaw.
All right. That wasn't so bad. Well done.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, your favorite tree, for habitat, for hunting, for looking at, what is your favorite tree?
So I'm going to pick a tree and a shrub. So my favorite tree is a box elder, just because they hinge beautifully, and they grow like weeds when you're trying to promote regen in an old field environment. So I love, and they're great browse for deer. The deer just hammer them up here. So, and they grow fast.
I think that's
so I
first.
love box elder.
All these episodes in, I don't think we've had that one.
If we would have asked Jake that question, he may have said the same thing way back when, but I'm not sure. Yeah, that's the first, Brian. I think you're right.
I'm a big fan of the box elder, and then I love, when it comes to a shrub, I love wild plum, just because they're thicket forming, great soft mass early season. The deer love browsing them. They make great bedding cover. So if I can get plum going on a property, I absolutely am going to do it, because I think when you talk about bang for your buck, I don't think you can beat a wild plum.
Great answers, Sam. Great answers. Appreciate you being the test subject here on the rapid fire. So well done, and great podcast. I think if you want to plug all your stuff right now, now's the time to do it. And we just really appreciate you coming on, man. Great conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me. When you reached out to me a month ago, I was really looking forward to this conversation, because I just think it's so fun what you guys have been doing, and kind of spurring on that next generation of habitat managers. So I love your mission and love the guests that you've been having on, and I think it's just a great message overall. And then no problem. And as far as my stuff, you can find me at, I got 3 different outlets, I guess, that you can find me on. Facebook, it's just Purpose-Filled Habitat Management. I got a YouTube channel, Purpose-Filled Habitat Management. If you follow that, of course, anybody that runs YouTube, if you subscribe to it, any YouTuber would say they'd appreciate that. And then I just finally got a website going called pfhabitat.com. So pfhabitat.com. So yeah, if you got anybody has any questions or anything or comments or whatever, I love talking about this stuff. That's the whole reason I started the Facebook page and YouTube channel to begin with, is because I needed an outlet for this stuff. So I love dialoguing with like-minded guys, and so don't be scared to reach out and start a conversation with me, because I enjoy it thoroughly.
Well, congrats again on a heck of a season, and we really appreciate your time tonight, Sam. Let's keep in touch.
Sounds great, man. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Sam.